truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Monday, May 20th, 2024, the 1216th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. A paid subscription allows you to get the show ad-free, to participate in the conversation on Substack, and to join in the interactive live streams every Wednesday. You can subscribe for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. But if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast right there on Substack or a wide variety of podcast platforms and, of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'm your moderator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, just a little note before we get started. Tonight on the Badlands Media channel over on Rumble, I will be starting a brand new show with my good friend Patrick Gunnels. The show is going to be called Hindsight 2020, and we are going to be taking a look back at the news throughout 2020, basically replaying all of that year as we go through all of this year. Every week, we will be looking back to the same time period in 2020 and going through that news with the perspective that these last 4 years have allowed us to gain. I have said before that I believe this year will be kind of a rerun of all those major narratives that played out through 2020, sort of giving everyone a chance to figure these things out for themselves before it becomes immediately publicly obvious. It's definitely better to wake up on your own than it is to be woken up as the result of some jarring life event. And so hopefully with the perspective gained over the last 4 years, we'll be able to look back at those events and those stories and understand that we could have and should have known everything necessary to avoid all the many pitfalls of that year. And perhaps in that realization, it will enable us to avoid them this time around. So Patrick and I will be doing that show starting this Monday evening at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central, over on the Badlands Media channel on Rumble. I spent the afternoon yesterday beginning to research stories from 2020 for the show, and it really is eye-opening to look back at all the things we were told throughout that year through far more awake and informed eyes. So I hope that sounds interesting. I hope it sounds like something you want to check out. And if it does, we will see you there. All right, so let's get started with the now near total collapse of the Matthew Colangelo, Alvin Bragg fake prosecution of Donald Trump as we get into the third act of Law and Order New York, The Loudest Hush Money. We have the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen, testifying. Michael Cohen, as you know, is an admitted and convicted perjurer, apparently, and looks to be Stormy Daniels' accomplice in an attempt to extort Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is not actually the person who committed a crime here, and that's why they had to make up a crime to claim that Donald Trump committed it. It turns out that Donald Trump is the victim of various crimes. So let's go to Fox News with today's major revelations. The headline, New York versus Trump. Michael Cohen admits to stealing tens of thousands from former president's business. What? How could it be? Before now, it seemed like they were really going to send Trump to prison. Former Trump attorney Michael Cohen admitted in testimony Monday that he stole thousands of dollars from the Trump Organization by overstating how much he paid a tech company that provided services for the Trump Organization. You stole from Trump Org, right? Trump attorney Todd Blanche asked Cohen. Yes, sir, Cohen responded. The testimony stems from his comments last week when he detailed to the court that he and former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg calculated a $420,000 repayment to Cohen for his $130,000 payment to former pornography star Stormy Daniels. Cohen's payment to Daniels came ahead of the 2016 election to quiet her claims of an alleged affair with Trump in 2006. Cohen previously testified that the repayment was, quote unquote, grossed up to prevent him from taking a tax hit, and also included reimbursement for paying tech company Redfinch an alleged $50,000. Cohen testified Monday that he went to TD Bank and withdrew cash over a couple of days to pay Redfinch for its services, which he stored in a brown paper bag. The cash ultimately totaled about $20,000, which he gave to Redfinch's CEO, according to Cohen, but he said he never gave the company the total $50,000. During a 2017 meeting on the repayment plan, Cohen said he told Weisselberg he paid Redfinch $50,000, meaning he pocketed a $30,000 difference. You lied to Weisselberg about how much you needed for Redfinch, Blanche asked Cohen, and Cohen confirmed he had. He testified that the Trump Organization thought he paid the full amount, for which he was still reimbursed despite not having actually paid it. Have you paid back the Trump Organization for the money you stole from them? Blanche also asked Monday. No, sir, Cohen responded. So how many ways has it been that this fake indictment has now fallen apart? Did Trump and Stormy ever have sex? No, according to Donald Trump. No, according to Stormy Daniels. Is it illegal to create NDAs? No. Was he using campaign funds to pay off Stormy Daniels? No. Which is why the Federal Election Commission was not interested in charging Donald Trump for anything. Do we have a quote-unquote former president facing charges for the first time ever over a bookkeeping incident past the statute of limitations that he wasn't involved with in the first place? Yeah, it seems like that's what's going on. A novel legal theory? Yeah. A case prosecuted by members of an illegitimate president's administration? Yeah. An admitted perjurer as the prosecution's star witness? Yeah. Was this all about bringing some women out to make salacious claims against Donald Trump so they could run around calling him a creep and a pervert and a rapist and a cheater again? Yes, of course that's what it was about. They wanted to make Trump look like a criminal right in the middle of a fake election year, the effect being that it would take him off the campaign trail and thus establish obvious election interference. Alvin Bragg indicted Trump nearly 14 months ago. At the time, we talked about how fake it was. We talked about how the prosecution's case would blow up in their faces and make Donald Trump look like the victim. And here we are watching all of that play out exactly in real time. Should we pretend he's in more danger in the two cases brought by the illegitimate special counsel, Jack Smith, as the documents hoax has already crumbled? Or maybe it's the Fani Willis case down in Georgia that has already fallen apart in the public consciousness, if not in the courtroom just yet. The regime is now fretting that the other cases won't make it to trial before the election expected on November 5th. And to be honest, as I've said, that's probably their best case scenario, because actually allowing these cases to play out before the American public would expose the fact that the election actually was rigged and stolen. Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. And of course, Donald Trump knew that. He also did not incite a very violent insurrection in order to overthrow the United States government after a free and fair election. The uniparty media has made the case that Donald Trump is trying to delay all of these trials until after the election so that he won't be proven guilty and thrown in prison by then. But it's the uniparty who benefits most from these trials being delayed until after the election, because that allows them to maintain the presumption of guilt in at least some of the public consciousness. If these cases actually went to trial, the presumption of guilt would be eliminated completely, as it has been in this episode of Law and Order New York. Kash Patel was on set today in New York, and he made a statement to the press during a break in the trial. You'll hear in the background that there are some people trying to interfere with the ability to make a statement. This is about 90 seconds long, so if the sound really bothers you, go ahead and skip ahead. I totally get it.
Thank you, General. My name is Kash Patel, former national security prosecutor, former public defender, and I'm here to tell you, after 6 weeks of unconstitutional trial, we have finally found a crime. Michael Cohen admitted on the witness stand just this morning to 6 different felonies of stealing Donald Trump's money. After 6 weeks of trial, we finally have a crime. We also have a victim. That victim is Donald J. Trump. Michael Cohen admitted under oath to structuring transactions illegally and stealing tens of thousands of dollars from Donald Trump. What's even worse from a constitutional perspective is that the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York knew about Cohen's crimes for 6 years. The Department of Justice with Merrick Garland and Joe Biden knew about Michael Cohen's crimes. The District Attorney Alvin Bragg and his Fantasy Island knew about Michael Cohen's crimes, and he has been charged with 0 of those felonies. The core case of this unconstitutional circus is the biggest felon in the U.S. history, and Michael Cohen is their star witness. It is a total bastardization of due process. I am honored to be here in support of Donald J. Trump. He is being victimized, but we as a country are being victimized even more by the unconstitutional weaponization of justice and the two-tier system of justice that is on full display. I'm proud to be here, and I'm proud to be followed by New York's greatest police commissioner, Bernie Kerik.
So Cash calls the trial unconstitutional. He says that Michael Cohen on the witness stand admitted to 6 different felonies. And Cash makes the point that Alvin Bragg obviously knew about all of this going in. He puts him on the witness stand anyway. He didn't charge Cohen with any of those crimes. And the speculation being that Cohen was allowed off because he would be willing to make all of these claims against Donald Trump. Now, this narrative began 6-7 years ago, and we have now reached the point where the boomerang has gone all the way out and come all the way back around, and it is basically now just hovering directly in front of their faces, spinning around and just hitting them in the face over and over and over and over and over again. Now, I'm aware that normal boomerangs don't act that way, but normal boomerangs aren't thrown only to come back 8 years later. This one has a story to tell. It can't just hit you once, knock you over, and then be done. Let's see how CNN is taking it.
But this is significant because they appear to have caught Cohen in another lie, and this would be a lie to the other person who is allegedly part of this conspiracy, Alan Weisselberg, who prosecutors have chosen not to call because they believe that he would not testify, that he would plead the Fifth. The judge has urged them to bring him in anyway. They have not done that. So Blanche, once again, now focusing on the retainer agreement.
What this also does is it puts the onus on Michael Cohen. It was Michael Cohen who arranged this scheme, the repayment scheme. If he's the one fudging to Alan Weisselberg and lying about this and twisting that, it puts more of it on him than either Weisselberg or certainly on Donald Trump.
And so far, there is no direct link proven beyond a reasonable doubt to the defendant in this alleged conspiracy. There is a lot of evidence that has been presented. There's testimony from Michael Cohen. There's testimony from others about conversations. But that is the goal of the defense team. Mm-hmm. And this right here, this line of questioning, so far, they have established that Cohen may have lied in order to get some of this money.
I honestly cannot imagine what it must be like to be someone who is thoroughly Trump deranged, still a Trump hater in 2024. How bad all of this must feel. It's just constant mental and emotional torment. And it's being inflicted upon them by people they believe to be on their side. CNN is the network who sold them the Stormy Daniels, Michael Avenatti story. And we might as well mention the E. Jean Carroll nonsense while we're at it. Anderson Cooper is the one who spent all this time convincing the CNN audience that Donald Trump was actually guilty of all these things. And while I know this case was about the least serious of the issues, this is also the only case that had a chance to do real damage to Trump, because at least they were able to go after his reputation. They were able to use all sorts of salacious rumor and innuendo to try to shame and disgrace Trump, to try to make his family look bad. At least there was some relative narrative benefit to having all of this play out, or at least there was potentially. The other trials are based on easily disprovable factual claims. The prosecution making its case in the other trials won't even have the benefit of being able to make Trump look bad with the rumors and the innuendo. They're just going to try to pretend that he actually lied about the stolen election and actually incited the very violent insurrection. Everyone's already heard these stories for years and years and years. Those stories have already fallen apart. When you know the underlying facts aren't true, the accusations then sound like a credit to Donald Trump. And so the closing arguments in this case are expected next week. And so who knows when we might get a verdict. And just to be clear, I am saying that the case has fallen apart. I am not saying there's zero chance this jury might convict him. It would be ridiculous. It would cause a few outrageous news cycles, but it would ultimately make no difference. Are they going to haul Trump off to jail? It seems like that is going to be a scene at some point, and this might be their only opportunity. Maybe they'll try to imprison Donald Trump so that he can't debate with Joe Biden. That would be hilarious. Trump was in Dallas, Texas over the weekend speaking to the NRA's convention, and he spoke a bit on his storytelling style. He's kind of gone through this little bit before, but take a listen because you can apply this storytelling style to some of the much bigger narratives, these stories that have been playing out over the course of years throughout this Trump saga.
There was no negotiation. I said, I accept anything you want. Let's debate. And now they're shocked. They don't know what the hell to do because they have a debate. But just remember this. We'll go back and finish. You know, there is a genius to what I'm doing. You do know that. I go from here to there, and it all comes back into a beautiful picture. You know, it really, do you notice? It all comes back into a beautiful picture. Great memory. It's a beautiful thing.
When you look at the big picture of the last 9 years since Trump came down the escalator, we are under 1 month away from the 9-year anniversary of that event, by the way. You can see the pattern he just described playing out again and again on issue after issue after issue. And eventually we will get all the way around to the big reveal on Russiagate and Spygate and Obama's involvement. And then we'll just keep going all the way back. Bush's, Clinton's, back, Nixon, back, Kennedy. Sooner or later, it's all coming out. That's what this period is about. There is a genius to it. But it was his statement a few moments later that really got people riled up.
Horrible individual finishes the debate, which I think he will. If he's standing, they'll say it was a brilliant performance. It was a brilliant performance. They've never seen anything like it. Very much reminiscent of the days of FDR. You know, FDR was had a beautiful patrician voice, magnificent voice, great debater, very smart man. You know, FDR, 16 years, almost 16 years. He was 4-term. I don't know. Are we going to be considered 3-term or 2-term? You tell me. Ronnie, what do you think? Are we 3-term or 2-term if we win? But think of it. They're going to say, wonderful. Now, he did that State of the Union the other day. He was high as a kite. So I think we should call for drug tests on the debate. Yeah.
Now, a drug test for the debate would be very entertaining. I cannot imagine any scenario where the fake president would submit to a drug test in order to debate. It'll just be a constant refrain from the Trump camp in the lead up, and then it'll be something that absolutely everybody notices during the debate. Whatever they've been pumping in whatever Joe Biden is, you can expect he'll be chock full of that on the night of the debate. Doesn't matter what he says, the media is going to cover for him, but he has to seem like he is strong, confident, and in control. They'll drive that narrative and hope that that's what people remember. But as the drug test thing settles in over the course of the next 5 weeks till that debate, the audience will not read Joe's performance as strong and confident and commanding. They'll see it as, oh, this demented old pervert is hopped up on Viagra and crystal meth. But let's talk about Trump's comments on FDR and how many terms Trump has served. When he wins, will that be his second term or his third term? How is the normie brain supposed to compute something like that? How are they supposed to deal with a comment like that coming from the quote-unquote former president? What does he mean it could be his third term? Oh, right. They're pitching the notion that Trump is actually the one suffering from dementia. So here's how to explain it, normies. Trump was actually trying to insinuate that this would be his third election win, not his third term, just his third win, because he still, with no evidence, believes that he won in 2020. That's got to be what he's saying. The New York Post covered this yesterday. Donald Trump dangles idea of third term as president at NRA convention. Former President Donald Trump stirred up his detractors Saturday by openly musing about a third term as president during remarks at the National Rifle Association annual meeting. You know, FDR, 16 years, almost 16 years. He was 4 terms. I don't know, are we going to be considered 3-term or 2-term? Trump asked. Several attendees were heard chanting back 3. Under the 22nd Amendment, which was enacted in the 1950s, no one can be elected to the presidency more than twice. And I guess we'll just have to pretend that there's no way the 22nd Amendment could be challenged, considering they'd already passed unratified amendments to completely overturn the Constitution 70 years prior to that. But I digress. Former President Franklin D. Roosevelt won election for the presidency 4 times before the Constitution was amended. He died in office in 1945. You gotta kind of wonder, were those elections free and fair? I mean, sure, the regime was stealing elections in places like Germany, but they could never do that right here in America. Americans just loved FDR, that old commie. Trump previously doused cold water on the prospect of trying to scrap the 22nd Amendment. And that is terrible English. I wouldn't be in favor of it at all. I intend to serve 4 years and do a great job. And I want to bring our country back. I want to put it back on the right track. Our country is going down. We're a failing nation right now. We're a nation in turmoil, he told Time magazine last month. And again, the New York Post normies have no idea what to do with this. They think Trump is talking about his next term being the second and then running for another term after that. He also ruled out the pursuit of a 3rd term during an interview with NBC's Meet the Press last September. Should he win and serve out a 2nd term, he will be 82 at its conclusion and will take President Biden's title as the oldest president in U.S. history. Well, no, he won't, because Biden's not going to have a title as a president in U.S. history. By the time the history is written, everyone will realize that Joe Biden will never be president and was never president. The New York Post makes sure to let everybody know that Trump has said many times he does not intend to run for another term after his next term. And of course, they never consider any other possibility. They do make one more interesting note about his speech before the NRA on Saturday. During his address, Trump vowed to fire the head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives and scrap Biden administration policies on firearms. And you can imagine that that agency will be eliminated in full, as it should be. In my 2nd term, we will roll back every Biden attack on the 2nd Amendment. The attacks are coming fast and furious, Trump said. And of course, the illegitimate Biden administration does not represent the only group attacking the 2nd Amendment. We have seen Republican senators help out in that cause, particularly Texas's own John Cornyn. The uniparty right is more than happy to help their uniparty left pals in their attempts to disarm Americans, because obviously that is critical to subsuming this country fully into the global regime. Now, you heard his comments. The New York Post writer surely heard his comments. He printed the comments, and then he pretended like Donald Trump said something other than what he said. Trump asked, are we going to be considered 3-term or 2-term? Will it be 3-term or 2-term if we win? He wasn't hinting at maybe running again in 2028, but that's what the New York Post pretended he was talking about, and then made sure to let you know he's already said he's not going to do that. So what are we going to convince ourselves that Trump actually said or actually meant to avoid considering that maybe Donald Trump, as president of the United States of America, did not simply walk away and turn the future of the country over to the most corrupted and depraved people our nation has ever known? At some point, the explanation that sounds like it must be too crazy to be true, despite the fact that it explains absolutely everything, is actually the best possible explanation. But instead, we keep pretending that the fake news is real and Joe Biden must have received 81 million real lawful American votes. Now, there have been some interesting developments in the geopolitical landscape over the last couple of weeks. including reports of an attempted and thwarted coup in the Democratic Republic of Congo, rumors of an assassination attempt against Mohammed bin Salman that never materialized at all, a reported but failed assassination attempt on Robert Fico, who is the Prime Minister of Slovakia, and now reports of a successful assassination attempt, otherwise known as a helicopter crash, killing the President and Foreign Minister of Iran. Now, that one I'm going to keep an eye on for a couple of days. Maybe we'll talk about it Wednesday during the live stream or Thursday on the podcast. But the story is just too weird. There's something that seems wrong about it, and I don't quite know what it is, but I have my doubts. But let's talk about the Slovakian Prime Minister, and we will go to the Financial Times. This is from today. The headline: Slovaks debate if Fico will seek vengeance after assassination attempt. As Robert Fico recovers from the shocking attempt on his life, Slovaks ponder what kind of leader will emerge from the near-death experience. Will the Prime Minister turn the page, or will he seek revenge and cement his grip on power? Fico was shot at close range last week in what authorities described as a politically motivated attack. On Sunday, the Interior Ministry said the attacker, who was apprehended at the scene, may not have acted alone as previously believed. The premier's condition stabilized after 2 rounds of surgery following the shooting. And already we have a very strange narrative framing from this regime mouthpiece. The assassination attempt failed. Fico is expected to be okay. And rather than asking if the would-be assassins will be brought to justice and their co-conspirators be taken down, they're asking if he is going to seek revenge. The assassination attempt stunned Slovaks and reverberated across the continent only weeks before elections to the European Parliament. Wow, what does that have to do with anything? The parliament in Bratislava was suspended, and the main parties called for a temporary halt to the campaign for the EU vote. Oh, now I get it. This assassination attempt brought everything to a screeching halt. People now focus on whether Fico can recover, but then they will debate what he will do next, said Matej Kovac, a political consultant. I've seen every kind of change and deal that Fico could make, and I feel he is our most talented politician. But he has so far used that mostly to be in power rather than to maintain a long-term vision for the country. In October, the Moscow-friendly politician started his 4th term as premier in an unwieldy 3-way coalition led by his Smer party. Tapping into long-standing pro-Russian sentiment in the country, Fico criticized EU sanctions against Moscow and called for a negotiated settlement to war in Ukraine, a Kremlin line. And now you have a picture emerging for why the regime may have wanted him out. Worth mentioning, by the way, that this is the last day of the official term of the comedic actor in Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Sure, he has banned opposition political parties, and sure, he has canceled their election. But he gets to remain president because he also put Ukraine under martial law. And according to Western media, that means he is a legitimate president until this war ends. Banning opposition parties and canceling elections, you see, is not a problem if the country has already been put under martial law. Like if you were to, say, declare a national emergency for some reason in the United States, I'm just giving you what the parallel would be. If there was some reason for, let's say, a fake president like Joe Biden, who was installed by the global regime in a similar fashion as that which brought the comedic actor in Ukraine to power, then we would have a precedent of this sort of action and American approval of this sort of action. And, by the way, media approval of this sort of action. And Joe Biden would be able to ban opposition political parties and cancel the election. Because just like in Ukraine, he would be doing all of that in order to save our democracy from the threat posed by autocrats. Of course, Vladimir Putin is threatening Ukraine, which means the comedic actor is well within his rights to ban opposition political parties, cancel elections, all because of martial law. And so Donald Trump, the autocrat over here, same scenario. It's always been okay to destroy democracy in order to save it. But let's go back to the Financial Times. The 59-year-old has sat in parliament since 1992 and has dominated domestic politics since Slovakia joined the EU 2 decades ago. He has helped fuel divisions within Slovak society while striking backroom deals with different parties to take power. Oh, he's fueling divisions like Donald Trump, not like Joe Biden, who is a unifier. Although Fico was a communist before the fall of the Berlin Wall and positioned Smer as notionally social democratic, he has morphed into a nationalist conservative. Wow. So it's like he was never a communist to begin with. It's like they were just inverting that term throughout the Cold War. He ran an anti-EU, anti-Ukraine, and anti-migration campaign in last year's general election. But since returning to power, he did not attempt to block EU aid to Kyiv, in stark contrast with his ally, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. His government has also allowed Slovakia's privately owned defense companies to send more weapons to Ukraine. Domestically, however, Fico has emulated Orban on a number of policies, taking steps to stifle his critics in the media, civil society, and law enforcement. These moves have prompted criticism from Brussels, human rights groups, and the liberal opposition, who have all warned against the country heading in an authoritarian direction like neighboring Hungary. And we are all supposed to be very scared of Viktor Orban. By the way, when they talk about civil society, what they mean are corporations and NGOs aligned with the global agenda. It's like the foot soldiers of their fascist enterprise, the organizations that facilitate the agenda on the ground. On Wednesday, Fico was shot just as Parliament was debating a controversial plan to overhaul RTVS, the public broadcaster, which he accuses of having a liberal bias. Others warn the reform would erode the editorial independence of RTVS. And again, we have an example of the propaganda media of the global regime who do not have the slightest hesitation in calling Russian media and Chinese media outlets state media. Here they are actively supporting a state media organization, a public media organization, and worrying about its so-called independence. What they mean is that he's going to limit their ability to force the people of Slovakia to fund the production and dissemination of propaganda that will be used to fool them and their peers. State media in this case is good and necessary. Fico has a long record of verbally attacking journalists. Oh, really? Verbally attacking journalists? Is that anything like being the target of an attempted assassination based on the things that journalists report about you? It's hard to tell who the bigger victim might be. But unlike Orban, he did not use his previous time in power to create a loyal media, said Balázs Jarabík, a former Slovak official now at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. That may be about to change. In his election campaign, Fico stoked an anti-liberal resentment, accusing the mainstream media of being too deferential to the pro-EU parties that were in power before him, Jarabík said. Once he recovers, the premier could complete his mission of bringing the state broadcaster in line with his government. You got to love how the leader of a nation survives an assassination attempt, and the important story is whether or not he's going to be able to reshape the state media. Apparently, this qualifies as him taking revenge, doing what he said he was going to do before he was elected. The ruling majority is also pressing ahead with a law critics say will crack down on foreign funding and stigmatize NGOs that receive it. in a move reminiscent of Hungary's crackdown on opposition figures and civil rights groups that have financial ties with the West. Sounds like they're describing George Soros. And so, if you don't mind terribly, let's take a little detour. This is SputnikGlobe.com from 2018. Now, as you know, Sputnik is a Russian outlet, so assume whatever biases you like, and let's just hear what they have to say. How Soros is trying to influence political situation in Czech Republic and Slovakia. American billionaire George Soros could apparently have had a hand in the recent Slovak crisis. Peter Zantovsky, a lecturer at the University of Economics in Prague, told Sputnik, at the same time expressing doubts regarding the West's potential intentions to kickstart a color revolution in the Central European state. So this is 2018. U.S. billionaire George Soros linked non-governmental organizations in Central European states are focusing on, quote-unquote, Russian influence on society. Political analyst Peter Zantovsky told Sputnik. So non-governmental organizations, that's civil society. The analyst, who is researching the activities of Soros-funded media outlets and organizations and their influence on public opinion in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, pointed to various Slovakian media platforms. Sputnik quotes Zantovsky. It is openly stated on the web pages of these platforms that they are being funded by George Soros's Open Society foundations. Or, for example, the European Values Kremlin Watch project is being funded from the same foundation. The main goal of these platforms is to track Russian influence on Czech politics and society. At the same time, an analytical report of academics indicated that the Kremlin Watch project has nothing to do with an expert assessment. It appears to be political propaganda. These examples demonstrate that George Soros is funding very specific political activity. And George Soros' funding of this sort of activity and the staging of color revolutions goes back over 30 years to the end of the Cold War. And think about these various republics and states that used to be part of the Soviet Union. If you're in a one-party state and that state's ideology is communism, and you are a politician trying to fight the state and its ideology, well, you are a communist politician. We've talked about this dynamic before with China and the CCP. Any sovereign nationalist in China who has been in Chinese politics for some period of time has been at some point a member of the CCP. We should understand that as being exactly the same as our uniparty. And when we do, we can understand that some people who were members of the uniparty by virtue of having run as a member of either the Democrats or the Republicans does not necessarily mean that they are some kind of uniparty communist. It's important to see what these people are doing now, what values they represent, who their allies are, and most importantly, who their enemies are. Let's go back to this article in Sputnik. As for Soros's links to the European Values Organization, one can easily find that it is supported by the Human Rights League, which is also reportedly funded by the U.S. tycoon, that being Soros. Soros's interference in the affairs of European states has repeatedly become the focus of public attention. Previously, Slovak former Prime Minister Robert Fico accused President Andrej Kiska of destabilizing the situation in the country, citing his ties with the billionaire. The statement came after the murder of Slovak investigative journalist Jan Kuciak, who was shot dead on February 26, 2018. Kuciak's assassination prompted a wave of protests throughout the country. Tens of thousands took to the streets of Bratislava and other cities demanding a thorough inquiry into the journalist's death, as well as the resignation of the government. The journalist had been known for investigating Italian mafia links to senior Slovak officials. Fico said that Kiska and Soros held a secret personal meeting in September 2017. He publicly asked Kiska to explain why he had met with the investor and what they had discussed. Commenting on Fico's statement, Zantovsky noted that he believes that, quote, A politician that is holding such a high post would not have made such a statement if he did not have facts confirming them. Moreover, Fico said these words amid the biggest political crisis since the times of their former Prime Minister, Vladimir Messiar. So 6 years ago, we have Robert Fico, the man who was the target of last week's assassination attempt, blaming George Soros for political unrest in his country. And now we have the global regime's mouthpiece, the Financial Times, connecting an attempt on his life to his targeting of civil society organizations and NGOs. Let's hear it again. The ruling majority is also pressing ahead with a law critics say will crack down on foreign funding and stigmatize NGOs that receive it, in a move reminiscent of Hungary's crackdown on opposition figures and civil rights groups that have financial ties to the West. And you can look at Viktor Orban's history with George Soros. There's a reason they're connecting Fico with Orban here as well. It is exactly the same priority. These are issues that have been brewing for decades between these Eastern European former Soviet countries and George Soros, who has been trying to destabilize these countries and take them over for decades. This is a European media site called Euractiv. March 6th, 2018, the headline, Fico blames Soros for provoking instability in Slovakia. And there is a subsection, Soros behind president's speech, Fico says. Fico's first reaction to Kiska was to hint that the president's statement was not written in Slovakia. On Monday, March 4th, he was unambiguous. Quote, I want to pose a simple question to Mr. President. On 20 September 2017, in New York on Fifth Avenue, I am asking why the head of state would pay a visit on private soil to a person who has questionable reputation, and this person's name is George Soros. Some of the journalists present in the room started to laugh, one exclaiming, "You are being ridiculous." "You can laugh however much you want," replied Fico, and continued, "Why has he not taken any representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to this meeting? What happened after the murder of the journalists suggests that there is an attempt in this country for total destabilization." The current Slovakian president, Zuzana Čaputová, is considered a Soros puppet. So with all of that, let's go back to the Financial Times and wonder why the Financial Times doesn't give its readers this critical background and instead just worries that Fico is cracking down on foreign funding and stigmatizing NGOs. He's going after George Soros, the Open Society Foundation, and their networks and allies, exactly as it must be done every time one of these small nations kicks out the global regime. We saw the same thing in Myanmar. Back to the Financial Times. In February, the Slovak government closed down an anti-corruption agency, despite warnings from Brussels about the impact it will have on the rule of law and the risk of losing access to EU funds. So Fico closed down an anti-corruption agency. Remember hearing about how that regime intel asset, Alexei Navalny, was involved in an anti-corruption organization trying to hold Vladimir Putin to account? Just another one of the strategies, another total inversion in the messaging. The destabilization of these countries done under the guise of anti-corruption efforts. And what does that look like? When someone comes in and tries to shut those organizations down. Oh, well, these are anti-corruption organizations. So if you're shutting that down, it's probably because you're corrupt. And it mentions that Brussels warned them not to do it. That means the EU didn't like what Fico did, and they say, well, now you're not going to get any more of our money. And that's always part of the bargain. When you stop complying, you stop getting the carrot, and then you get the stick instead. The stick being they try to assassinate you. Some European officials fear Fico could become a more disruptive force, also within NATO, like Orban, who delayed the accession of Finland and Sweden. Prior to the attempt on his life, Fico joined the Hungarian leader in opposing Dutchman Mark Rutte as the next Secretary General of NATO. However, up to now, Fico has proved to be more compromising in private than in his pugnacious public appearances, said a senior EU official, adding that the Slovak premier was, quote, certainly not in Orban's league. So basically, he's bad, but we're going to say he's not that bad because we're still trying to exert leverage and we don't want to make things worse after we weren't able to kill him. And again, you should take every claim of an assassination attempt or even, honestly, an assassination with a grain of salt for a while, especially if there are pictures or video of the incident and those pictures and video themselves look way off. Wednesday's shooting is not the first watershed moment for Fico. In 2018, he was forced to resign as premier amid mass protests over the killings of a journalist and his fiancée. The reporter, Jan Kuciak, was investigating ties between Smer politicians and organized crime. Fico knows how to navigate difficult waters, but 2018 left him completely shocked by how abruptly he got forced out, said a Western diplomat in Bratislava. He now makes clever and opportunistic calculations combined with vengefulness toward those who ousted him, which includes a long list of journalists, prosecutors, and civil society activists. And you can think about the color revolutionists here in America. Journalists, obviously. The entirety of mainstream media participates in these various color revolution narratives, sometimes as controlled opposition as well. But all of the various social justice protests are a part of this playbook, this operation. BLM Antifa riots, pro-Hamas stuff, various anti-Trump protests, J6 infiltrators. We have the prosecutors, of course, going after Donald Trump right now. For instance, the Brookings Institution, Norm Eisen, the author of the Color Revolution playbook, presenting all of the white papers on which all of these fake indictments are based. The Transition Integrity Project, as we discussed last week, led by Rosa Brooks. That was the war game effort to plan for the period between the election and the inauguration, where they had to, quote unquote, fortify the steal. And then the civil society organizations, the NGOs, the bail funds, groups like the Center for Tech and Civic Life and Voto Latino, everyone involved in stealing elections. They're targeted because their job is to try to overthrow countries. When that fails, they're all going to be rounded up and arrested and prosecuted. That's the entire point. Why would anyone expect anything different to be done? It is going to, hopefully, be happening here in the relatively near future. Media figures and prosecutors and members of civil society organizations don't have some free pass to try to overthrow countries without being held accountable when it doesn't work. But let's close out the article here in the Financial Times. Other EU officials in the Slovak capital still hope the premier will not go full Orban. When Fico came back to power, some people said he would now be the second Orban. But there is still clearly a gap between what he says for his domestic audience and what he does. So it's not a black and white story, said an EU official, who I guess just refused to be named. I think he is very aware that Slovakia depends on EU money, so he will not go fully against EU rules and try to control everything in every area. And so once they reach the end of that process, it always comes to the same place, globalist money or not. They believe that will be the ultimate leverage in Slovakia, and they're trying to push that even with the BRICS coalition on the rise and offering new opportunities. And if and when they go that direction, and it sure seems like they're going to go that direction, what it comes down to is whether they can withstand the backlash and the onslaught. He's dodged an assassination attempt, reportedly, and then it will be a matter of whether or not the global regime is prepared to put up any show of kinetic force to hold on to another nation as it slips away. And of course, they would not even consider that after how they've been thoroughly embarrassed everywhere for years. It really is an incredible story, and these patterns just continue to fit. It's not all just a series of random disconnected events. It's the same playbook from both sides playing out cyclically all across the world, with slight variations in the details happening on slightly different timelines. There's a certain genius to it. It goes around and around, and then it all comes back in a beautiful picture. We'll stop there for today. We'll talk Congo coup at some point this week, I imagine, and the reported helicopter crash / assassination attempt of Ibrahim Raisi as that develops. And on Wednesday, the live stream will be at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. Hope to see you tonight over on Badlands Media for the pilot episode of my show with Patrick Gunnels, Hindsight 2020. Otherwise, I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under a quarter per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's